Metal fences, each 6 meters high with barbed wire. A concrete barrier that reaches deep underground to prevent anyone from digging tunnels. In addition, cameras, radar devices, sensors above and below ground. Watchtowers as high as houses with remote-controlled machine guns, behind them dunes. The fortifications separating the Gaza Strip from Israel were considered one of the most secure in the world. Israel invested more than $1 billion and in 3.5 years installed 140,000 tons of iron and steel along a length of 65 kilometers. On October 7th, fighters of the Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the second largest armed group, broke out of the Gaza Strip, which with 2 million inhabitants living on 365 square kilometers, some call the largest open-air prison in the world. They blew holes, tore down entire sections with bulldozers, and descended onto Israeli soil mounted on paragliders like some sort of aerial death squad. Then they swarmed into settlements, military bases, and the site of a music festival. The whole world knows by now. They unleashed hell on earth, and in the aftermath of over 1,400 dead and over 200 kidnapped to Gaza, including also foreign nationals, 2 questions remain. The first, what happens next? Now the answer to that question is long and complicated. We might get into it another time. The second question is, how could this happen? And while the historical and political answer to that is also long and complicated, from a strategical perspective, it's a lot easier to understand. The attack on October 7th would not have been possible without Iranian, Russian, and Syrian support. And by support, we mean training, weapons, and technologies. But also tactics that have been used extensively in the war in Ukraine. So, welcome to Talking Tactics, where this week it's about Hamas's unprecedented attack on Israel, in specific the weapons and strategy they used. Hamas is the Arabic word for vigor or fighting spirit, but it's also an acronym. It stands for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, or Islamic Resistance Movement. Founded in 1987 as an offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, many countries in the world consider it a terror group. For others, it's the strongest opposing force fighting for the Palestinian cause. It has a political wing and a military one called the Qassam Brigades. Both have a very radical approach to religion and to politics. The operation on the 7th of October was staged together with the Al-Quds Brigades of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Al-Quds, if you didn't know, is the Arabic name for Jerusalem. Anyway, on the 7th of October at 6:35 a.m. local time, an air raid alarm was sounded, and the first of around 3,000 rockets that Hamas was to fire that day were on their way to Israel. Hamas has quite a wide range of rockets and missiles available. Unguided rockets range from 107mm caliber to 303. The longest range is the Ayash 250 with around 250 kilometers range. Others are homemade, more primitive projectiles, like the Mutabar 1 anti-aircraft missiles, Qassam artillery rockets, and their 114mm system Rajab. The Hamas has published videos of them constructing rockets out of common water pipes. Hamas also uses Iranian-made Fajr 3, Fajr 5, and Syrian M302 missiles, as well as very short-range shoulder-portable systems like the Russian Strela, but also the newer Russian Igla, Chinese QW, its Iranian copy Mizar 1, as well as the North Korean HT-16 PGJ, which has previously been spotted in Syria as well. If you're wondering what the connection is, both Russia and Iran are avid supporters of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. The leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Ziad al-Nakhala, lives in the Syrian capital Damascus, so you can see. Anyway, the sheer number of rockets that might have confused you in this section of our episode overwhelmed Israel's Iron Dome air defense system, which is one of the most effective in the world. By the way, Hamas is also in possession of Russian-made Kornet. Back in 2011, Israel accused Russia of supplying this anti-tank system to Hamas when a Kornet hit a school bus. Anyway, at the time the air alarm sounded on October 7th, the first terrorists were already rampaging through Israeli settlements. At 5:56 a.m., a security camera in a kibbutz less than 5 kilometers from the border filmed a Hamas attacker in uniform firing at a grey Mazda. He and the one with him were probably one of the first terrorists to enter Israel from Gaza that day, 2 of more than 1,500 altogether. According to the Israeli military, the fence was breached at an astonishing 29 points altogether. Another video shows armed men assaulting the Erez border crossing in northern Gaza. The Erez border and command post is basically the central nervous system, where all surveillance and command structures of the border region run together. Using commercial drones, the Hamas fighters drop explosive charges over guard towers, radio towers, and sensors. The fast capture of the border crossing in the early hours of the morning laid the foundation for their operation, as it cut the main chain of information and caused the Israeli army to completely lose oversight of events for the following hours. This would not have been possible for Hamas if they hadn't deployed commercial drones armed with explosives, like we have seen countless times in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In fact, the militants were even able to capture one and destroy a couple of Merkava 4 battle tanks, along with around 10 armored personnel carriers that Israel had built out of captured Arab T-55 tanks from the 1973 war. The Merkava main battle tank is a powerful weapon and the pride of the Israeli armed forces. At 63 tons, it is significantly heavier than, for example, the German Leopard 2. The engineers designed the Chariot, the English translation of its Hebrew name, to be particularly safe. That's why, unlike in most tanks, the engine is located at the front. What is remarkable is the similarity in how Hamas was able to take out the tank in comparison to what we have seen here in Ukraine. A video shows the tank from the air. The turret with the gun barrel is just turning a bit when a grenade, presumably a special armor-piercing model, falls on the tank and hits it. It bursts into flames. Time and again, Ukrainian and Russian troops have managed to use small drones in this way. Compared to attacks with most anti-tank weapons from the ground, attacks from the air on these tanks offer an advantage. The dropped shells or grenades can hit the turret ring or even enter the tank if the hatch is open, and thus attack the most vulnerable part. The head of Ukrainian military intelligence, General Budanov, is sure that Hamas learned how to operate drones like this from Russia. No one but the people who have had the experience of our theater of war could have done this. Since we were not here, it must have been the Russians, he said. In fact, Hamas had launched a drone program already a few years back, relying mostly on winged models like the Shahab, which means meteor. One of their most promising drone developers, Mohammad Zweri, received training in aeronautics and drones in Iran and became Hamas' chief engineer. He was assassinated in Tunisia in 2016. Hamas seemed to have developed new FPV drones which they used on October 7th, named after him. On a side note, according to Budanov, Russia has also supplied Hamas with a number of small firearms, including Western weapons that they captured during the ongoing invasion. If you're wondering at this point how these militant groups received this vast amount of equipment, which is a very legitimate question, the short answer is tunnels, mainly to Egypt and some tunnels to the sea. But more about that in the future, as well as the question if, considering the sheer number of Israeli tanks, armored vehicles and equipment, the Russo-Ukrainian methods used by Hamas will be enough to effectively fight against the IDF in light of an impending ground invasion of Gaza, or whether the Pandora's box they opened by committing this incredibly brutal attack will in fact mean their end, at least for the group as we know it now. Anyway, thanks for watching Talking Tactics, hit like and subscribe, and see you next week. If you want to stay up to date with the latest news from Ukraine, you can also follow our channel on Telegram.